is this who I authentically am? Therefore, am I living to the utmost of my life's potential? Or am I scared and therefore settling for something that feels safe?
Welcome to the Creators House podcast. My name is Potwala Alexander, founder of Creators House. If you're looking to build a career within the creative industry, then you've come to the right place. The aim of this podcast is to see you win. Let's get into it. Welcome to today's podcast. Today we have Rufai, who is a photographer, poet, filmmaker, mental health researcher, playwright, and immersive artist. Kay is London born, but grew up across Nigeria and America. Growing up in South Central LA, he found his love for music, just one of his many creative outlets. But Kay is most commonly known for his fascinating project, the Smiling Boys Project, which was created to remove the stereotype of young black boys and allow us all to see them as they are, instead of how society portrays them to be. Through the Smiling Boys Project, Kay has been featured in The Guardian, BBC, The Voice, various other news outlets. Kay was shortlisted by the House of Parliament to be the Commission Art in Residence for the celebration of Race Relations Act in Britain. He was also the first ever Art in Residence for the police force in the West Midlands. He is a fascinating speaker and I'm super excited to get deeper into his story. Okay, appreciate you being here with us, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. I'm thinking, who's that guy?
Yeah, I know, right?
Thank you so much for welcoming me here.
Yeah,
man.
no, I've been excited for this conversation because we met recently, actually. But I've been aware of your work for quite a while. Seeing the stuff you've been doing with Smiling Boys and the various other projects, and we're going to get into all of those. But what I really want to know is the early years, all right? So as you have mentioned to me before, you're born in UK, moved to Nigeria, then moved to America. So this is a similar experience to me, and that's why I'm kind of interested to talk about it. So I was born in UK, but then I moved to Gambia when I was 7, lived there for about 7 years, and then came back. You've got one more country than I have, but similar kind of experience. But what I want to know, first off, is talk to me, how old were you when you moved to Nigeria?
3,
okay. 3 until how old? 8. 3 to 8. Yeah. So what was that experience like, even though of course you were very young, but how do you feel that has potentially shaped you now?
I mean, everything about who I am now is definitely owed to that sort of reintroduction to my kind of roots, as it were. But there were 2 stints. So that 3 to 8 was a big stint, but I couldn't remember so much more about that. I just remember that I was raised by my grandmother, really, sort of. And my mother was like super busy working, single mother.
Was she in Nigeria still?
Yeah. So she came with us. So it was me and my older sister. But then there was another stint when I was 15 where I was brought back to Nigeria on a holiday, which lasted 1.5 years long. That was probably the most significant one because at that moment I'd already lived in America for a while, and then my mother kind of was, I guess, scared of like what she perceived I was getting involved in, and then she brought me back to Nigeria and took me to a boarding school in Nigeria. And then I think I was raised predominantly by my grandmother at the time because my mother was so busy working and trying to make ends meet. And then living in a kind of boarding school, which is in a rural part of Nigeria. And that was such a kind of massive shock for me, especially living in the West at that point and before being withdrawn back to Nigeria. And then actually going to a school that was predominantly lots of children of people who were, I guess, farmers, seamstresses, tailors, people who had just everyday jobs. And then being this kid that came into the school wearing Jordans and thinking I was too cool, but everybody's like, well, what is that? What's Jordans? Like, what's Oreos? All these things that I thought was super cool. So that changed a lot of my life in that perception of who I was at that time in an environment where I was the only kind of real Western kid. Yeah. So I got into some trouble. I got stabbed in that school. Okay. And that really was like a kind of, it brought me down to earth and really got me to reflect on what it is that I was projecting that also calls for that to be an outcome. Okay. So when I say stabbed, again, it's contextually, it was a pen knife. So it wasn't like a chefing situation like it happens here in this UK. So there was not really any intention of like killing me. It was more just like a fight. But obviously that's kind of one of the tools that they used at the time. So I guess that to me was really what was probably more significant than the 3 to 8 period, because I can't remember much about that. I just remember that I was around a lot of family, my dad's siblings, my mother's siblings. My mother's father had 4 wives, so as I'm sure you can imagine, that's a big kind of polygamous, wider family circle. So I just remember a lot of that, going to different children's parties and things like that. But I think the significant memory I have is probably that period of going back between 15 and 17 was probably more significant in terms of recognizing a lot about like the stories that were sold to me about Africa versus the realities of what I experienced when I was back there, and me knowing my cousins a lot more and really spending time and understanding like the roots of the culture and why those things are so rich and important.
Yeah, for sure. And I can attest to that as well. Like obviously everyone has different experiences, different backgrounds and whatever, but for me, I really appreciate my dad specifically taking me back to Gambia when I was young. So grew up quite a significant part of my life, right, 7 to 14, growing up there, because it really does change your outlook on life in general. And he made sure that I saw different parts of Africa as well, right? Generally speaking, people think that there is a lot of poverty in Africa, but there's also a lot of richness in Africa, right? There's some beautiful places there.
Absolutely.
And I saw it all. I saw both sides, right? Just like there is in any other country. But it really does kind of give you perspective. So how would you say you're a different man from 15? So you're in America at that point, right? 15 to then going back to America at 17.
Yeah.
How did you see yourself as a different
man? Man, almost like day and night. Because
really?
I think for me, as I kind of reflect on that, it was definitely just a sense of pride, of being like African and getting to understand what that actually looks like, not the narratives that's sold to us like on TV or whatever it is that we consume ideas about Africa from. So being there on the ground and seeing like, the innovations, the intelligence, like the technologies, and also the poverty, but also the ingenuity that people develop as a result of poverty, like all those things were so inspiring. So I came back actually having like much more of a robust problem solving attitude, because like I seen people that had nothing. I seen kids like create a football out of like garbage. I seen kids like create like, I don't know, like games out of like bottle opened like Fanta cans, they create cars and all these things. I'm like, raw man, that's so dope. So I came back having like a much more like problem-solving attitude, innovative mindset, and just a sense of pride. So therefore, like when people would, and that's what made me like really witty. So when I came back and people would try and bully me or try and tease me for like being African, I would always have a comeback. Whereas before I'd just be like, just kind of like quiet and just be embarrassed. But like I always had a comeback. Like, what you know about Africa, man? Yeah, if we climbed on trees, then y'all probably did X, Y, Z, and everybody like, oh, stop. And then that's basically what kind of opened the door for me to also kind of realize that I was really good with words, because like I kind of unlocked that ability to come back and have a comeback, so, and then in kind of the American currency, like that's a big thing, because everybody's like, yo man, you can't really talk smack about him, he always has something to say back. So then people will be like trying to force me to get into like battles and stuff with people. That's where my music bit came in.
Rap battles?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because then people like, oh man, you can't mess with him. Like he's slick with the words. And then that's where like I started to get into music. Because then people would just come in at lunchtime or wherever. I'll say, yo, all right, go talk smack about him. And then I'll just get into like a freestyle and we get back and forth. And then that's kind of how that came up as well.
Okay, so talk to me about, so music, am I right in saying was almost like your first?
Yeah, that was my first. Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
And this point, you're in South Central LA. So yeah, talk to me through like that experience. And how
obviously,
that
like, as a young black boy growing up in that environment, like the people that are like tangibly there that make music that you're consuming were like, NWAs came from there, well, Tupac wasn't originally from California, but he was, he made his career from California. So listen to him and those kinds of people that obviously they spoke about things that I could kind of tangibly see or feel, because that's the environment that they were rapping about and that's where they were from. So when I was younger, because I didn't grow up with my father, like a lot of the things that I used to process my emotions was writing stuff down. But to me, it was just like journaling. But then I realized that I really loved that solitude of just writing and just putting my thoughts down. I was quite shy as a kid, but my pad, and that was the way in which I spoke about my emotions. So writing was like naturally my kind of, it was my tool to survive, but also it was like my creative outlet without knowing. So when that kind of transition of coming back after being in Nigeria, and that confidence came with it, then the original tool that I'd already been developing about writing before, I kind of married those two together, because then I had this confidence of self, but then I kind of started to make music and actually document my feelings in like artistic ways, because I'd been a student of hip hop from like a very young age, you know, like listening to all these people that were super dope. And then obviously like getting to the point where I felt like, okay, cool, I'm a little more confident now. I can actually write stuff and put raps together. And that was like the introduction to like really making music. And then soon after that, like a couple of years later, I moved back to London because my mother, at the time when I was going to consider going to university, and like going to university in America is like, if your parents ain't got like a trust fund for you or nothing like that, that's not really, or if you don't get a scholarship, that's not really a goal. So because I was born in London, like to come to university here, I'd have been a home student, which meant that I only paid like $3,000 per term.
So what age did you come back?
Just 19 on 20. So I came back at that age, and I went to university here in Queen Mary, East London. So yeah, because it was cheaper to go to university here. So that was like that transition. And then when I was here, my mom wanted me to be a doctor, as I'm sure most Africans can relate to that kind of traditional pressure of like first generation immigrant parents who, my older sister's a lawyer. My mom wanted me to be a doctor. So I went to university in Queen Mary. I didn't get in for medicine, but I got in for biomedical engineering. I absolutely hated it. So I started to make music while I was in uni, trying to balance those two lives. But got to the point where, you know, my music was like taking me to places. I was like touring and traveling and opening for different acts. So it got to the point where I couldn't kind of hide that life anymore. So I just kind of dropped out of university, to the dismay of my mother, obviously. Yeah. But so that was the journey of music, really. And then at that point, I kind of realized that, you know, I did music for quite a while, and it took me to really cool kind of spots, and I learned a lot about my creativity. But I realized that I got to a point in music where there was really a decision to make. To go from being like B-list to A-list, I had to make some decisions about the type of music I was gonna make, you know, because people's like, oh, you got mad talent and you've done songs with these people, and that's cool, but actually to potentially posit yourself in a place where you can get a deal, you need to be rapping about these types of things. Like, you look like a fashionable guy.
Be a little bit more specific. So what kind of music were you doing? So what kind of music did they want you to do?
Right. So I was making hip hop music. So I was rapping, and I was talking about the kind of things that I grew up loving, which is things about like being a young black boy and the environments that we're growing up in, and how that really creates a lot of our outcomes, all these things. And, you know, I'll get featured on like the radio a little bit, but like it wouldn't be like the prime spot or whatever, you know. And at the time, like, I'd done a song with Ed Sheeran, and there was a conversation about like, okay, cool.
So what year was that?
That was in 2000 and I feel like that's 2007.
Was that before
16. Before he became global. Okay. Yeah, before he became global. Like, he was already known in the UK. He had already been signed to like Elton John's label, you know, management label, and he had just, I think he hadn't released his first album at the time. Okay. I think it was at the point where everybody like knew of his talent, and like everybody was like, wow, this is like, because he was already on the scene, because he used to busk, he used to play on, so like everybody in the music industry already knew about this guy. Like, he's like the next Amy Winehouse type of energy, you know. He had already got all the major deals, all the record deals were fighting for him, you know. Mm-hmm. So because we had been performing on the scene quite a bit, and we kind of built a relationship, and, you know, he was like, yo, cool, yeah, I like what you do. Like, I'll come to the studio, we jammed and we created songs and stuff like that. So at that point, after we created songs, then he got his like official deal, you know, and then the labels was like, okay, cool, you got a song with him, that's dope, okay, cool. But for you to now leverage that, your image has to like, okay, not be about this conscious thing that you're talking about. You know, it's like, okay, you got to be like this guy that's like fashionable, super swaggy, and talking about girls and all these things, which is like, that's not really my energy, you know, like. So there was that decision to make around like, okay, cool, do I come out with this type of sound and this type of energy, or I just realized that music ain't really for me like that, you know. And then I chose the latter because I realized that that's not what I really love. You know, I don't really like cool. I can listen to like Puff Daddy or whatever and talk about girls and that, but it's like there's much more. The people that I'm inspired by with the Tupacs of this world, which has something to say, you know, and like the Ice Cubes and, you know, Andre 3000s. Those are the people that I grew up loving what they were about. So I couldn't really justify the integrity of myself to create something that was misaligned with my kind of my core as a person. So I made that decision to really step away from music. But what I realized is like I loved the poetics in music. Like I never lost love for words. You know, I just didn't enjoy like the whole kind of stage life and fame and being backstage and like, you know, all of that stuff. But what happened was like whenever I used to perform, you know, young people would come to the shows with like their mentors and they'll wait after the show and they'll be like, yo, like, can you say a word to our young people who really want to make music? And I would like start talking to them and they would be like, you know, what you said really touched me. Like, blah, blah, blah. I'm from the ends and what you were saying really inspired me. And I'm like, bro, that's dope. I didn't even know there was a thing called youth work, you know? But when those young people wait behind the shows and like their mentors say, can you kind of give them some advice or give them any tips on how to make their own music and speak their voices and stuff like that, then I used to mentor some young people.
And how old were you at this point?
I was about 21, 22, 20.
Quite
21,
young.
22, you know? And then I thought, man, I actually enjoy this. I enjoy actually working with young people to inspire them. And then that's when I realized that there was a career in like working with young people. Then I got offered a role by like a charity that worked with young people. And then I ended up becoming like a manager in there, like writing like business plans that's like £2 million to like fund youth programs and design youth programs and train staff. So I became so removed from young people. I became like somebody who was like in a corporate space, and I realized that's not me. You know, like what I love is like being on the ground, working with young people and being creative. So I jumped out of that after like 6 years of being in that environment, and then that's when I kind of pursued my artistic career. Like took the risk to like leave 9 to 5 and just think, okay, what am I gonna do that is rooted in what I love, which is creativity and working with young people, but also bringing the arts into it. So yeah, that's the narrative.
And we're gonna obviously talk about Smiling Boys. But what I was interested about, what I kind of took away from that journey of, you know, about 18 to 22, is you've known when to leave and you've known when to quit. I guess my question was, how do you know when to quit? But I don't even know if that's the right question to ask. But like, I guess what advice would you have for people that are in this situation? I think firstly, you're talking about leaving university, coming from an African household. I think a lot of people can relate to that. But then, you know, being in music, doing songs with Ed Sheeran and like being on the cusp and then leaving that. Same with corporate. It's like, when do you know is the right time to leave something?
Man, that's a very good question. I think when I look at what is the key points of like focus on those 3 significant periods in my life is integrity. Like when I was in university and I was studying something my mom wanted me to study, I was not being integral to myself because I knew inside of myself, I do not want to be in university doing any of these things here. I don't see how that's going to benefit my life, and it doesn't have no correlation with what I see about my life. So I could do that to keep my mom happy, or I decided to make a decision that centers myself first, which is what I did, which was like, I'm being integral to my own desires. That was the first decision. The decision about music, that I made that decision because I knew my integrity was going to be compromised if I was making music about things that weren't rooted in my own desires and passions. Like, and that was the kind of the compass that guided me. And then the last one around like quitting a place of work, I thought, I know what my purpose is, and that's working with young people, and that's making a difference through art. Like being in this place, yes, I have a steady paycheck, you know, and now I'm looking back at how much I was being paid, which I thought was a lot them times. I'm thinking, what? Imagine if I stayed in that life, you know, thinking that was safe and secure for me because it was monthly paycheck. But I took the risk thinking, okay, I'm probably not going to, I went back to my mom's couch. Do you know what I mean? I was sleeping on her couch, not making no money, you know. So I made those decisions knowing that I didn't have a house to go to, or, you know, I gave up my flat that I was living in because I couldn't pay for that, you know. But I knew I was being integral to myself because I knew in the long run, I was going to look back at myself and say, bro, you made a great decision. You know, even though I didn't know how it was really going to pan out, but I knew that it was better than staying somewhere that I know in the core of my being is not authentic to myself. So I think that's like the navigation tool that helped me across those 3 decisions.
And it's almost, I don't know whether it's chasing happiness, but I guess chasing purpose, being centered at that. We'll get back into the conversation shortly, but before we do, I just want to take a few seconds to just give you a little bit more information about Creators House. So Creators House is a not-for-profit youth empowerment organization where we aim to empower and support young creatives. We do it through a few different ways. Firstly, we have this amazing creative studio where you can do things like photography, podcasting, graphic design, music production, and much, much more. And it's totally free for 18 to 25-year-olds. It's a top-level studio. Literally, all you need to do is go on our website and book your slot. But then secondly, we also know how important education is. So we want to make sure that we're educating young creatives. This podcast is part of that. But then we also run in-person workshops where we bring in industry professionals to run them. But then we also have more smaller individual-based mentoring as well. And then thirdly, which we're most proud about, is we also offer free therapy to 18 to 25-year-olds because we know how important mental health is. So if you want to know more, just check us out on our website. All the details will be below. But for now, let's get back into the conversation. And I think that's a really interesting topic you talk about is leaving a 9-to-5 and going and pursuing your own project, whatever that may look like. A question I've got for you, because you've obviously gone through the period of, doing your own thing, but then also working at companies. Nowadays, I feel like a lot of young people are pushing this narrative of, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a business person, I want to be freelance, I want to be creative, I want to do their own thing. And I think sometimes the 9-to-5 is kind of looked down on a little bit, right? I've got my own opinions on this.
Yeah.
But what is your thoughts around working a 9-to-5 versus doing your own thing? Right.
I mean, the key is not all of us can work in a 9-to-5 and not all of us can be entrepreneurs. It's about creating a mindset and a society that provides room for everybody to be what is authentic to them. Yeah. There's some people that they were born to be in a 9-to-5. They were born to take orders from people. And it's not in like a patronizing way. They function best by people telling them what they need to do. And that's the best way that they can be fulfilled in terms of their purpose and their ability to really follow a particular order and deliver an outcome. Whereas some people is the opposite. They are born disruptors. They cannot function in an environment that is cookie cutter, and therefore the society has to also be set up for those kinds of people. And I think the bigger question is figuring out who are you authentically. And it's not...
How do you do that? I know that's a big question. Yeah. It's different, but
I think, it goes back to the same things I was saying. It's to be very in touch with who you authentically are, to know if you're being integral to that person. And that's what I had to do. I had to do that work in myself to be authentically clear in who I am, to know, is this who I authentically am? Therefore, am I living to the utmost of my life's potential? Or am I scared and therefore settling for something that feels safe? And I think in the core of a lot of us, we know the answer to that. Okay. But we are often sometimes scared. We don't have the tools. We don't have the support system to actually really interrogate those things. So that's why most of us never ask ourselves that question. And we live in this kind of very mundane life. And then ultimately, at some point, we hope that when we are retired, we can do what we really love, and obviously life is not promised. So most of us never make it to that point. So for me, the question is really asking yourself the authentic question: are you living your most fulfilled life doing what you're doing in a 9-to-5? If you know that you have all these other creative things that's inside of you, but you're too scared that, maybe it's not going to work, or maybe I'm not going to make any money, maybe I'm not going to be able to go to Dubai and pop that champagne, then the truth is you're not living to your best life, and then you need to ask yourself the second question is okay, what am I going to do about that, So that was my way of navigating that, and I think it could be really helpful for people to be honest in themselves around that. Okay,
interesting. So then what I want to, let's talk about Smiling Boys Project. Yeah. And I love that a smile comes to your face when I say that. That's beautiful. I want to talk about it on both sides. Mm-hmm. Right? First, tell me what Smiling Boys Project is. Mm-hmm. Almost the consumer facing version, almost. Right. But then I also want to know the behind the scenes that no one gets to see. Right. What's it like running a project like that? So let's start first of all. What is the Smiling Boys Project?
Yeah, so Smiling Boys Project is an 8-week program designed through research that I conducted, traveling around the top 5 happiest countries in the world. So I conducted this research for 6 months. And then I came back with these 8 pillars that are then used to design the program. These are the 8 pillars of happiness. So the program is 8 weeks long because of these 8 pillars of happiness, which I guess I could get into shortly. But yeah. And then the program is designed to empower Black boys to improve their mental well-being by giving them tools to develop their emotional literacy, to understand their emotions, to be able to unpick what it means to be a Black boy within the context of the world that they're living in. And then at the end of the 8-week program, I photograph them and dare them to show a version of themselves to the world that is counter-stereotypical. And then through the final public-facing output of the project, then I have these exhibitions with these images and challenge the society to challenge the stereotypes that they uphold of Black boys, which is obviously opposite to what the images suggest. Yeah. So that's the forward-facing and the public-facing element of the Smiling Boys project.
And how long has that been going on for now?
So for about 3.5 years, close to 4 years now, we've been doing that project.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you've been featured in quite a few press around it. What's the reaction been?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction is multiple fold. So the reaction with the boys is one fold, and then obviously within the school, and then the general public. With the boys, it's transformational. You know, for the first time, they get the opportunity to have a space that is just them within the macro of an environment, either in a school where they don't ever have spaces for just being Black boys. And if they do, it's because they're in trouble. And then all of you in detention, all of you in isolation, you know, but actually to have a positive space that's just Black boys. So it's racially homogenous. It's led by somebody that looks like them. It gives them the permission to authentically say what's on their mind, even things that maybe they get in trouble for by saying elsewhere. Like they have the freedom to say those things in a room with the ability to know that they will be challenged around some of their thought processes, around some of their feelings and their imaginations. So that is so transformational for them. Giving them the license to feel emotions that are not just anger and violence. That's super transformational. And then within the school, you know, it's very challenging for a lot of schools to recognize how their infrastructure, how their culture in itself is contributory to the lack of mental health outcomes, positive ones for Black boys in their school, thinking about their policies, thinking about their cultures, thinking about their biases, thinking about their, you know, their racist infrastructure and how those things contribute to the negative, you know, outcomes of Black boys' mental well-being. So that's, again, like another significant outcome for schools, but also really empowering for schools to really have tools to help support these boys and actually unpick their own kind of biases and how these things inform subconsciously how they treat some of the students in their school. And then the final part, you know, the outcome of parents is just so groundbreaking. You know, I have parents just cry when they see the images of their son, you know, because they're like, I haven't seen him like that since he was 7.
When you say like that, just for perspective for people that may not have seen, it's boys smiling.
Yes, they're boys smiling in such joyous, childlike, goofy, like beautiful ways. But then as we know about the adultification of Black children particularly, but boys, you know, 13, 14-year-olds, some of them are taller than me, taller than you. You know, I'm 6 foot tall. There's some 13, 14-year-olds are taller than me. And they walk into the world as though they're men already because society thinks of them as men, you know? So this idea of being childlike, this idea of being goofy, this idea of being smiley is something they look at and say, bro, that's moist, bro, that's wet, that's this, that's all that. So actually, for their mothers to get to see them in this way that it's like, wow, I remember that version of my son. I don't see it often, you know, and they break down into tears. Sometimes they, obviously at the end of the project, I do film kind of capture of their experiences, and these boys talk about what has transformed in their lives. So their parents even hearing that, it's like, wow, like my son is talking about his emotions. Like I've never heard that before, you know? So seeing that with the parents is so like, it's so heartening for me. And then the final part is like seeing the way strangers interact with these images. Like I could see the penny drop with a lot of them. You know, they look at these images, and obviously the aim of the project is to ask you to think about why it is that you don't see these versions of Black boys everywhere. if you're somebody that works in the media or somebody who works in corporate spaces, why don't you see black boys in that space? And then if you see them, why don't you see them like this? What are we not doing in the society to provide a space where black boys can walk around being able to be authentically free and smile and be this joyous version of themselves? Is it because our criminal justice system over criminalizes them? Is it because they're 9.5 times more likely to be stopped by the police in London? Is it because they're 4 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act? Is it because they're 3.5 times more likely to be kicked out of mainstream education? Those are statistics that should allow you to question why is it that we don't see that. So for me, those kind of impacts is so glaringly obvious when people are engaging with the exhibition, because you can see that penny drop in their mind and thinking, wow, we need to be doing more and doing better. Yeah.
I love it. I just love your work. And I said, I've been aware of your work for a little while. And then recently we've met and we've kind of, connected. And it's just as a person of color, I think your work is just so almost so obvious, but yet so amazingly done. It's like pictures of young black boys smiling. You're like, yeah, as a black person or person of color, you're like, yeah, like I do. This should be shown. And
right.
This is something that the society don't normally get to see. So the work you're doing is absolutely fascinating.
Thank you,
and
man.
I suggest
Appreciate
anyone, take a look into it a little bit more. I think we could spend a whole podcast just talking about that alone.
We could.
And you've received loads of, positive views on that, both through press and through multiple different places. But what I'm kind of quite interested in hearing your point of view on is the behind the scenes, right? So that's kind of what everyone gets to see. So kind of rewinding the conversation a little bit, right? So you're in a secure, there's no such thing as a secure 9 to 5, but quote unquote secure 9 to 5. You leave your house, go back to your parents' house to start a project which is driven through passion. What's it like behind the scenes running a project like this? Because you're on your own, right?
Yeah.
What's that like?
It is, I would preface this by saying it's a joyous dream, but behind that kind of big statement of it being a dream, like the day-to-day of not where I'm at now, because I'll get to that in a moment, but where it was in the beginning, like the first year when I was laying on my mom's couch, I wrote 39 funding applications and 38 of them were a no. So to imagine the kind of like energy zapping, the kind of like, I guess the feeling of just not being good enough and this thing not being a good idea, because all these 38 separate funders said it's not a good idea, So the fact that, I don't know if anybody's ever written an application for a fund. It's not 10 minutes long,
it's long.
Sometimes you spend 2 weeks on each one, So I did 38 back to back and they all was no. But I still was like, this is an incredibly powerful idea, and I know that I'm going to make it happen. So while I was writing these grants, I still was giving up my time to go into schools to pilot the program because I was that invested in the idea of it. And then on the 39th grant, I got the funding to go and do the research and then to create the program. So for me, after that, the process of then actually designing the program using creativity with all these tools that I had already developed in myself. So writing, a poetry, photography, film. I thought, okay, these things are what have helped me in my life. And I know that if I infuse these things with this research, it can provide tools to help all these black boys in their own lives too. So that was like a lot of the groundwork of just being a creative and thinking, how can I use creativity in all these research to actually do some really powerful things where these boys don't know that they're actually doing these like scientifically proven things to support themselves by using like play and creativity to do that. So yeah, and then another hard part is like getting schools to buy into it, going into schools and saying, I got this project for black boys only. Schools are like, why just black boys? Why can't we just have all boys? Or why can't we have just BME boys? Or, so that was, again, another challenge, really being very disciplined and very unwavering about the fact that it has to be just black boys. You know, you have to be bold in your school to acknowledge that there are things that black boys need that is different to what everybody else needs. You know, so that was another struggle, really convincing schools that they need to.
This was all before Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Before that
exactly.
global education happened.
Exactly, exactly. So that was really challenging to really convince them about that. And then getting the funding. After that first funding that allowed us to do the research and pilot it in the program, you know, then to get the consistent funding to be able to provide it to other schools. Because the program, you know, I'm not scared to talk about money here, but the program costs £5,000 for each school. Most schools will tell you they don't have £5,000, especially to pay for black boys to do a program. So I had to source the funding elsewhere, you know, and I'm in about 30 something schools. So that's a lot of schools that don't have £5,000. So I had to do it in some schools for free first, you know, so therefore my time wasn't being paid for, you know, but I was very passionate about this. And then that meant that I needed to find creative ways to source the funding to be able to provide the project in schools. You know, some schools are able to pay £500. Some schools at best may be able to pay £1,000, but there's still a shortfall of like 4,000, 3,500 that I have to always find because that's how much it costs to run the program, you know. Then that meant that I needed to apply for more funding or start to think about corporate partnerships, about who can afford to, or who can and should be funding projects that benefit young people in their community as well. So that's basically where I guess my kind of corporate hat, based on working in a 9-to-5, that came in thinking, okay, now I need to strategize. I need to think about, okay, who am I going to leverage what their kind of mission should be to support young people, especially black young people in this community, to actually use that to then create a partnership that supports the young people in those communities, but also giving this organization or this corporate brand the benefit of the value of what they should be doing, which is like actually being community centered and being more community focused. So yeah, so I guess that's a lot of the back end of it, like being somebody who wears the hat of like, you know, operations person who seeks out grants, who fills grants, who employs people. Because now I have 2 support assistant facilitators over the last year. They've come in to kind of shadow me as a facilitator, but also start to co-facilitate with me as well. And then also to like, you know, to develop partnerships with brands so that some of these boys can start to get access into new, you know, uncharted territories and different creative industries that they might not have access to in the first place. So that's a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that perhaps people don't get to see.
Is it lonely?
Wow. So in the last couple of years, I have somebody who's been like an operational support. She's amazing. She met me at one of the exhibitions and said, I love this so much. What can I do? Like, I don't know what I can do. I'm a black woman, but I'm not a boy, but let me know what I can do to support you. And then I said to her at the time, I said, I really value your desire to support me, but I'm not going to use your expertise until I can pay for you, right? And that's going to be my first challenge, to unlock some money where I can actually pay for your time. So that took me about 7 to 8 months. I unlocked some funding. I was like, I can bring you on board to support with the operations. So she's supported me in a way that it's not that lonely, because even if it's just like the frustrations of like, oh my God, can you believe after this 38 grand, I got no money? Like, I had her to really bounce those things with. I have my little sister as well, who's amazing. Like, she's like a creative as well. So like, she's unofficially like one of the co-founders, but not really, but she's like super there. So that makes it so not lonely at all. So yeah, so those 2 incredible women have been like supportive in the kind of back end and operational stuff. You know, my little sister designs a lot of the website stuff, a lot of the kind of digital stuff. Like, she does a lot of that. She's like super, like, she's so dope. So she does a lot of that stuff as well. So yeah, so it doesn't feel lonely, but in terms of like the mantle of the work that I'm doing, that feels lonely, you know, because like they are there to support a particular part of the project. But in terms of like the process and like delivering the program, that has been lonely for a long time, because it's a singular mission. You know, it's only me has the clarity and the vision. Like, they understand it because I'm like living it. So they're like, okay, cool. That's how you want it to be done. That's cool. But it only comes from me, you know? Yeah. So that's a very singular and a very lonely place as well, you know?
And I asked that question because I'm in a similar situation where, you know, I run 2 organizations, a not-for-profit, Creative House, and then InZone, a creative agency. And as much as I have the amazing support of my wife. And she's like there for me, like non-stop, right, day in, day out. Both not just as a wife, and also as a business partner, essentially, from both angles. And I still find it lonely, right? And you mentioned you've got your sister, and you've got this wonderful lady that helped you out, and there's people there to support, but it's still lonely. So I think the message there is, and that's why I really wanted to ask you that. So for young people that are really kind of getting into running their own organization, whether it's a business or not-for-profit or whatever else, it is a lonely road. And from my point of view, my experience, I used to work at Nike, corporate, big, right? Loads of people, had loads of friends, loads of team activities. Used to play ball at lunchtime and all of that. Going from that to being on your own, like it's a big shift. So when we talk about leaving a 9 to 5 and running your own thing, there's a lot that goes to it, and a lot of things that I think need to be considered. So yeah, super interesting. So I want to kind of come back to one point you mentioned around, you said you're not too worried to talk about money. So you kind of started an organization that's led through passion and a desire to do good, right? But you need to put food on the table. So I guess the conversation I'd like to have is for young people that may be looking to do their own thing, but may not necessarily want to go into business, whether it's a product or service or whatever. But to be fair, now I guess yours. Okay, let me rephrase that. How do you see your organization? Do you see it as a business, or do you see it as a not-for-profit? Do you see it? What do you see it as?
It's definitely not-for-profit. Like, I don't see it as a business. Maybe because obviously, like, the people who benefit from the service never have to pay a penny for it. So for me, it doesn't. It's a business on paper but I don't make money from the project, and the people who benefit from the service never pay for it. So it's like, it's a not-for-profit. I source funding from public streams or brands that pay for the delivery process of the project, that pays for, I give young people incentives for being able to develop themselves through this 8-week program. Sometimes I give them Jordans, sometimes I give them like JD Sport vouchers, I give them all these things that I source from brands, or I have to pay for with my own kind of money. So the program is not designed in any way to make any money. It's designed to provide services that we are not providing for particular groups of kids in our society. So for me, there's like the program is designed just to pay for the salaries of the people that deliver the program, and to be able to pay for all of the things. Because on the 8th week, I order Nando's for all of them, every school that I'm in and every group of young people. So that's like £400 every Nando's session that I run with these boys, and every group get a Nando's, so it's like, so if the school usually pay me £500, 400 of that goes to Nando's. I have 2 staff that come and work for me. The invoice I get at the end of every 8-week program is about $1,500 for each of them, so it's like, I don't make any money from the program, and the program is designed simply to provide the service that benefits these young people, and I'm just going to figure out how to make the money pay for my life too. The service pay for my life in terms of the work and the design and the delivery of the program that I put in as well. So yeah,
that's admirable, because there's not a lot of people out there that would yes, you do, you earn from it and you're able to live and survive. But I feel like there's, especially with Instagram, or not just Instagram, social media, shall I say, there's a lot of young people, I guess, chasing the bag, right? I know you're not doing that, but if you were doing that, how do you think that would jeopardize, I guess, your happiness?
Yeah, I think the conversation of chasing the bag is like, I think we can be more nuanced about that. So for example, I'm very interested in establishing partnerships with people like Adobe and Nike that equal things like 5 million or 10 million, because that's a bag. But what I would be guaranteeing is that money is not going into my pocket to drive a Lambo. You know, that money is to be able to create an infrastructure that provides continuous opportunity for groups of young people, where therefore I can also make some money doing something that I love. You know, like I'm not trying to be out here every month thinking, oh, can I pay my bills? You know, no, I want to be able to. I go on holiday a lot. You know, I go to like 9 countries a year, you know, minimum. I do things that I absolutely love. And this work allows me to do that because I'm not doing it and thinking, oh, I'm not going to make any money this month. I'm just trying to make sure these young boys are great. Like the two things have to happen at the same time. I don't think it's a choice. One over the other. In the beginning, it was one over the other because I value this work so much that I thought, okay, I'm still going to put my time in, even if I'm not making money from it. But at the stage that it is in now, you know, absolutely need for it to pay for my life as well as it does what it's meant to do to support the young people for sure.
I think that's the message that's the kind of what I was getting after is you can earn money doing good.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's we don't always have to be chasing those businesses. You know, hey, all of us, you know, money allows us to be free.
Yeah.
Right? Money gives us loads of amazing things. But it doesn't always have to be chasing the money only. Like sometimes you chase the purpose, you chase the dream,
right? And
the money comes and provides for that. So I think that was a key message. The conversation I want to get into is kind of coming back a little bit around the beginning of the journey to now, right? So as you kind of alluded to this already, that early on you had to apply for 38 grants, and then you got one on the 39th. You went through. You've been running this for 4 years. You said right, 4 years. So for a long period of time. Where sometimes, you know, you didn't have a lot of funding, you pay for things yourself, you weren't being paid. To, you know, 3-4 years down the line, it's in a better position. That's resilience, right? How do you go about continuing to believe in something when others don't?
I mean, we live in a world of evidence, right? And especially when I'm trying to apply for funding, sometimes they're like, oh, what is the kind of quantitative evidence? Whereas, I mean, when you work with people, sometimes it's not always quantitative evidence that you have. You have qualitative, which to me is equally as powerful, if not more powerful and more transformational. So for me, the evidence that keeps me believing in the work is in the young people, seeing the transformation, seeing the impact it's having in their everyday lives, and seeing like that's so tangible that even when people are telling me it's not a great idea, or people is not thinking they can't continue, because now I'm gonna design Smile and Growth project that's gonna be ready by next year. You know, I'm going to LA this year to pilot Smile and Boys project in North America for the first time. Like those are things that is because I can see the effect and the impact it's having in London. I can see how many black girls come to me after every session and say, why is it the only black boys having it? We need this too. I'm like, I listen to that. I'm like, that's true. You need that. And I need to give the time for black women to co-design that program together. And that program is ready to be delivered to black girls. So that's something that, again, is so evident to me that need is there. And therefore creating a sensitively designed program to speak to that need. Again, North America, we know that, you know, the black experience over there is also so uniquely contested, and how much that results to things like George Floyd's murder and Trayvon Martin and all of this. So for me, that's something that's always been on my mind, knowing that I need to also do it over there as well. And I'm going to do that this end of the year, but no one's paying for that. You know, I thought, okay, like I have roots in California. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to go meet with all these schools. I'm going to find corporate sponsors out there or wherever else to make that happen. But the first iteration of it, doing the exhibition there, that's coming from my pocket.
So it's interesting where you're almost going full circle again.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But also, again, admirable that you're willing to go through that again.
Yeah, because I see the results of what happened this first time, you know, and I know that if I didn't do that, nobody would jump on it afterwards. And that's ultimately what it is. I need to go out there, and that's the thing about like faith, you know, not necessarily from like a religious standpoint, but that's how faith works. You have to step out in faith, and then people's like, oh, okay, cool. And I heard this amazing analogy by this rapper that I love called Toby and Wigwe. And it said, you'd be surprised how many people would help you when they see you outside of your car pushing your car forward. But if you're sitting in the car saying my car is broken down, nobody's gonna know that you're pushing the car. So the people are just gonna walk past you. When they see you pushing the car, you'd be surprised how many people will come and join you and say, do you need a hand? And that's what I realized, that you have to take that leap first.
That is, I want to pause on that because that's such a great analogy. And the reason why I want to pause on that is because I feel like that's what I'm experiencing right now
Mm.
with Creators House. And we had to self-fund it and get it to a position where we're showing something, right? It's a space. Young people are coming here. They're experiencing it. And I genuinely feel like that. It's like I was pushing a car, me and my wife, right? We're pushing a car. And then as soon as it starts to show the impact, then people start coming about, and it's mad how that happens. But going back to the question, so you answered it in regards to almost corporations and brands, right? When they don't believe in you. What about when your family or your friends don't believe in you?
Yeah, man, that's why it's a lonely road. My mother now is like one of the biggest like fans of me now. She like sending like every like Guardian or BBC, she sends it to all her friends, and I'm like, bro, that's not how she started, bro. Like, she didn't really believe in it like that, you know. Like, she was scared, and I think as I grow older now, I hold a lot of compassion for her. But I realize that it's not as much as we would love for all our family and our friends to really be biggest cheerleaders of us. It's most likely not going to happen like that. You know, there are odd stories of people's parents that were championing them from the top of the roof and saying, what do you need? I'm going to give you my life savings to do this. There's odd stories, but that's not how the majority goes. You know, so it's recognizing that if you're waiting for them to be the ones to give you the green light, then you probably never do nothing. And it's not because they hate you, and it's not because they don't care for you. You have to realize that fear is such a powerful emotion. And fear withholds people from doing a lot of incredible things. And when you realize that that's what a lot of people respond from, the place of fear, then you know that you cannot rely on people to give you the green light that you need. As long as you have that yourself, it would be great if they're on the bandwagon early, but that should not stop you from pushing what you believe is authentically your own kind of mission or your purpose in life. That's kind of how I look at it. But it's very disheartening. It's very saddening. It's very isolating when people that you really care about are not advocates of what you're doing, at least in the early stages. It could really be the source of your depression even. And also ultimately it can be the source of you not actually living your authentic life. And I know that because I had moments of having those doubts and those feelings of like sadness and emotions that were harking to depression, you know, because the people around me at the time didn't have the level of support that I wish they gave me in the beginning.
Yeah, and that's again such an important message, because that narrative is the same. When once you're kind of pushing the car, then they're gonna jump on board as well. But I had to learn this again very early on. And in when the time that I learned this, it wasn't even a business. I started putting out some videos on YouTube, right? So it's travel vlogs for fun. It was just banner. But then like some of my friends weren't watching the videos. And I'm like, yo, like, give me a view, bro.
Right.
That's all I'm asking. Like, give me one view. Like, it's all right. You don't even have to watch the whole thing.
Exactly.
Just watch it for a few minutes and then bounce. Like, give me a view. And some of the boys weren't watching the videos. And then that's where I actually had to, it kind of clicked that sometimes your friends aren't your consumer and they're not your audience. And that's okay, right? Like, I think we need to learn to separate friendship/family with our consumer/client or whatever it is that you're into. So I think a super interesting one. And the more people understand that narrative and don't let it get to them, I think the better. Next question I want to get into is around co-creation and collaboration, right? As a creative, it's generally something that a lot of people do. I guess two-part question. One is, how much do you co-create and collaborate with others, and what do you feel the benefit of that is? And then a caveat question to that is, how careful are you of collaboration versus protecting your creativity, protecting your ideas, even protecting your IPO to an extent? Like, where's the line?
Bro, that's a difficult thing, you know. I think I would say historically, I'm very siloed. Like, I work a lot by myself. I think about ideas a lot by myself. I activate a lot of them by myself. But I realize there is a limit to that in terms of like just how much you can do and how much you can learn and grow. So, you know, as I said, I have two young people, well, youngish men that have come onto my program to support as a kind of assistant facilitator, but we co-design, you know, I asked them to bring in thoughts and ideas about particular, you know, pillars and how we can expand on that. With the Smile and Grows program, I don't have a first experience of being a Black girl. So for me to design a program for Black girls would be quite stupid, which is what most people do in this world. They put together things that are supposed to help other people, but they don't have a first experience about that thing, which is why it becomes disingenuous. That's why it's not sustainable, because it's not authentic. So for me, I'm going to be working with like a whole team of incredible Black women who I'm going to be learning from that. I'm going to be understanding, okay, this is what Black girls are going through. This is how you think creatively they can speak to that stuff. And I would just be playing a backseat to trying to understand that. And I actually use that to really expand on my knowledge around the experiences of different groups of people, and that's the same with creativity. I think, creativity mixed with lived experience is one of the most powerful things. But if you don't have the lived experience, how can you provide the best service or the best product for people without having those people's voices reflected in this? So I have an alumni, cohort of over 1,200. There's a lot of them that I bring in and incentivize them or pay them to come in and just tell me about different things about like, what is it to be a young Black boy growing up in Hackney? What type of services do you want to see? Or how do you want Smiling Boys to speak to that experience of yours as a cohort, as an alumni? What do you need from us? And how does that feel authentic? So I bring them in and I create a space for them to use their experiences to co-create something that would benefit them. And I learn a lot from that, because I don't know what it's like to be 15-year-old growing up in Kennington or Peckham or, wherever, all these places. So for me to assume it's not authentic. So I bring them in, I get them to feel like they're equals in that space, because they are, their knowledge and their experiences are valuable. And that's what a lot of these big industries and big firms do, because they try and take all these people's experiences, but not actually see them as equal creators in that space. And that's what, for me, I feel like as people who are creating brands or creating, infrastructures, we need to shift that kind of power and make all these groups of people feel the value of their experiences, the value of their knowledge, the value of their creativities equally in the same plateau as the rest of those people in those infrastructures. So I think it's super important to co-create and collaborate. But I'm not the greatest at it. I'm developing that about myself, but I see the value in that.
Okay, so then on that then, I know you have partnered with brands, right? So that previous question was around co-creating with individuals. But you obviously work with a lot of organizations. You work with schools and other organizations to kind of deliver the programs. But you also work with brands, specifically Nike is one of them. And tell me if there's others. I know you've done some stuff with the BBC, right?
Yeah.
So like, what is I guess the question is, for a lot of creators, that's kind of where they want to get to, right? Where they can co-create and work with these big, global, amazing brands that we kind of grew up wearing or using or whatever. What's your experience like collaborating with a brand like Nike, and what advice do you have? How do you carry yourself? How do you manage that relationship so that stays a healthy relationship on both ends?
It's difficult. I'll put it that way, because I think what I realize is there are some amazing people, but it's still a very capitalist brand. Most of these brands I'm talking about, Apple's another one we've been in conversation over the last 2-3 years.
You mentioned Adobe as well, right?
Yes, and those are people there are people in those companies that have a very strong passion, and then they seek me out, or we connect somehow, and they say, you know what, there's ways in which we can benefit what you're doing, and actually that also helps us gain actual like Gen Z user insight around that. So that's like a mutual collaboration. I have no problem with mutual collaborations, but what I find is, because especially with huge brands like Nike, so for example, obviously after George Floyd's murder, there was a significant pressure on massive brands to be visibly doing a lot of things. Yeah. Nike specifically pledged, at least the American version, pledged a huge amount of money to Black causes. UK didn't do that earlier on. Yeah. So then there's these groups of people, some Black women within Nike, that really then decided that we need to be doing something in London and in the UK as well. So they pioneered something like a particular grant and a funding to do that. My challenges have been that there's a money part of things, which, okay, I can always accept money. Money's good. But for a brand like Nike, a particular amount of money is like a drop in the ocean, right? What's actually more important is access to social capital and social mobility for groups of young people whose images, whose imagery, whose culture has been monetized by Nike for so long. So my biggest challenge is really like pushing for more. Like, it's okay to just give people money. It's okay to just put like somebody from a community on a billboard. But that's not really what we're talking about. It's like, how can we create access? So I'm trying to get like an internship scheme for young Black boys to come through and understand how is it to design sneakers in Nike? What is it like to understand all these other roles that happen in Nike? That's more difficult for me to achieve with Nike than it is for them to give me this amount of money, you know? And that's what my biggest passion is. Because if you asked me in the beginning, would you take money or you would take this? I'd rather take this, because to me, I'm more interested in the legacy and the long-standing opportunity for young people to come out of poverty, for young people to come out of criminality. So give me 15,000 pounds. That's 3 schools. That's done and dusted. But what I really want is like, how can you give them access into a world that they've never had access to beyond just seeing gigs in a Nike advert or seeing Skepta? Okay, that's cool. So they're going to buy more tech fleeces, but actually, how can you provide them with access into a world that they've been shut out from? So I think that's the more difficult things that I found with the relationships with brands, because it's so easy for them to give a little bit of money here to pay me to come and do a talk, or to give Smiling Boys a particular pot of money to fund a particular school or 2 schools or 3 schools or whatever. But it's to actually get the infrastructural entry is the biggest bit. And obviously we know that's been gate kept by people that don't look like us for so long. So there's so much fights to have in those brands, because some of the people who are allies, they don't have the power to push for those things to happen. So it's such a slow process, and that's what I've found. So I guess back to the advice is to have a lot of key non-negotiables, because you can really get like blown away by the fact, oh my God, this big brand wants to do this thing with me. It's like, yes, because you're dope. Like, you need to know that first. And secondly, is to have some non-negotiables. Like, yes, they want to do this, but actually, what are you asking from them? And you need to push for that. And that means sometimes like you're annoying from their perspective, but they need to know that if they want you, they need to take all of everything that you're asking for, not just like, oh, we need to look good, you know, because they have all of the money, you know, and they're not doing you a favor, even though you feel like they're giving you money, but they're not doing you a favor. Like, they are benefiting massively from you being involved in what they're doing. And that's something I had to learn, to have that voice that was saying, ask for that. Don't just be quiet because it's Nike and they're saying, all right, it's cool for them to give you this. No, like, ask for what you really think they should be giving you. And they'll be uncomfortable. And they'll be like, oh, I'm going to ask my senior whatever, but let them do that and then come back to you and see what comes from that. So that's basically my experience. And that's what I would probably kind of advise young people or those who are creatives to really have an unwavering clarity about what they need, and to not just be quiet about that because it's a big brand.
Yeah, I love that. We can carry on this conversation for so long, but obviously I'm aware of time, but I think we could probably have this chat for like 2-3 hours, man. There's just so much more that we can talk about. Maybe we could part 2.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do a part 2. But before we wrap it up, you've obviously given quite a lot of advice, but if you could summarize up for a young creative that's looking to come into the creative industry, maybe similar journey to you, maybe not, what would your top piece of advice be for them?
The first one is to not be scared to experiment things. Like, you have a couple ideas. Don't just be like, oh, this one is not going to pop. I'm not going to try this one. It's like, I actually try it, and you just never know. And then actually, maybe while trying it, you could realize, I can bring this element there and then bring this other element. So to not be scared to experiment, to not be scared to speak your project into existence. Anyone that wants to listen, tell them, talk to them about it. And then you might hear, the more times you say it, you refine it more, you know, or you might speak to somebody that says, oh, that sounds good, but how about this? Or you think about this. And then you start to realize the more you talk about it, the more you're more confident in it, or the more you realize, okay, there's bits that I can twist on because I said it to this person and thought, that's nice, but you can do this, you know. But what tends to happen a lot is, you know, people just keep their ideas to themselves because they're scared of people shutting it down. But I realized that the more you speak it out, the more you speak it into existence, but also the more you're more confident in it, and the more that other people start to maybe realize that, oh, wow, that's a dope idea. You can do this. I can connect you to this person or whatever. And to network your ass off. Like, that to me, you know, it sounds like a cliche, like your network is your net worth. Is it that way around? Your net worth is your network. Something like that. Yeah. Like, it sounds like a cliche, but it's so important. Obviously, we're talking about that off air, about the people that you know. But it's like, I realize that it's so valuable for me to show up to places and to just network with people, you know, and just in that room, I find out, oh, this person does that, and there's a way in which we can connect, or this person's dad runs a hedge fund and they're looking to give away this amount of money so that they can look good. I am all up in that conversation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because if you don't show up in those places, you're missing out on so many things. And it's so important to realize that as much as it's important for you to do the work, you also have to connect with a lot of different people. Not necessarily just from like a predatory standpoint that I want to see what this person could do for me. It's like, you just might see how both of you can work together to then create something together. Or you might look at somebody who has the funds to do that, or somebody who has the connection to open the doors for you somewhere. So networking is so important. And that's why a lot of creators are so bad at that, because we just sit in our silos and create. And we think, oh, why is it not popping? It's like, okay, cool. The actual product is great. But like, who are you showing it to? Who are you talking to? Who are you connecting with? How are you expanding your networks? And that's what, to me, I realize, especially as Black people, you know, because we don't have a legacy of people who have been in all of these spaces before. So we need to do it laterally. Like, there's a lot of us that are doing so many things in the same level, but we're not connecting to elevate to the next level. Or we might know people who are on the next level, and because we're not talking to each other, we can say, oh yeah, I got a cousin that's in Adobe or Google, and he runs this, you know, particular arm of Google, and they're looking for young Black creators. Like, oh my God, I didn't know that. You know, so it's like, we need to realize that networking is equally as valuable as actually doing the creative amazingness. So those are my tips.
Dope. I love that, bro.
Thank you for having me, man. It's so amazing.
Appreciate your time.
Thank
that was
you.
a dope conversation, man. So that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure you follow our socials so you don't miss any of the amazing content that we have coming up. All the details will be in the description below. And we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.